Isn't that odd? Or, I don't know if you know this guy, Lindsey Graham, down in South Carolina. This usually got a lot of hoots when I was down in Myrtle Beach, and Barney Frank. But for some reason, the American Bankers Association feels that they're both worth the same level of endorsement and the same level of support. Or Lindsey Graham and Chris doesn't see any difference between those two guys. There's absolutely no reason not to give to one or the other. They're going to both represent the Bank of America. And my personal favorite, Barack Obama and my former senator, Bob Bennett, actually he's my current senator until next January, but he's on his way out the door. For some reason, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were willing to invest $233,000 almost equally in the two of them. Barack Obama is the second leading donor that they gave to on the Democratic side, and Bob Bennett was the #1 Republican they gave to on the Republican side. So if that kind of leaves you scratching your head, like I do, why don't you just start taking a look at this financial puzzle that we've been looking at for several years now and putting together. And I want you to consider this, because we're going to start looking at how this happens, how it is that, and why they would support both sides of the aisles like that, when of course we all know the Republicans and Democrats, we're more divided than ever, right? We're constantly fighting it. Somehow something's happening in Washington that they appear somehow impervious to that. Here's one of the first things to consider. In 2006, less than 1/12 of 1% of American adults, so we're not talking of us, are only giving less than $1 out of every $5 that our representatives are using to fund their perpetual reelection campaigns. This chart here represents where that money goes. That 1/12 of 1% who gave 81%, that 81%, that huge chunk of the pie, when you see the blue bars up there, that's the money that all the special interest groups gave to incumbents, no matter which party they belong to. The red bars represents the amount of money that they gave to open seats. There is no incumbent, but they're trying to win that seat. And then you see those little tiny green slivers? That's the amount of money that's gone to challengers. Now think about that. If they like Republicans and Democrats equally well, which is what it looks like, how come they don't like Republicans or Democrat challengers? They seem to like Republican and Democrat incumbents is what they like. And then since that, as a result of that, since 1976, over 90% of all special interest money has gone to the incumbents. 90%, okay? And as a result of that, since 1976, 94% of all incumbents have won re-election. Okay? And if you look at our history, if you look at the right-hand side of that chart, you'll see some numbers in the 80s. Prior to 1976, through from the 1930s to the 1970s, early 1970s, you pretty much saw a lot of 70 and 80% re-election rates. Prior to that, it was down in the 60s, 50s. There was times when we would have over a 50% turnover in the House. That wasn't an unusual occurrence. It's only been in the last 30 years that suddenly we're way up in the 90%. It's a new phenomenon that we're dealing with. And as a result, this chart represents the cost of what it takes to defeat an incumbent. Okay, and over on the left-hand side, in 2004, it took a little over $1.5 million. All the rest of those numbers are adjusted for 2004 dollars. If you adjust it for inflation, you go back to 1974, it'll cost almost nothing to defeat an incumbent in comparison. Okay, so it's just in the last 30 years, this big money special interest groups have really dominated the landscape politically. And that there's a reason for that, we believe. In 1974, it's a pretty key year. That was the year they implemented the process of our current budget process and how our current budget process works. We'll show you a little bit more about that in a little bit as well. But if you look at that chart, if you look over on the right-hand side in 1974, these two images is what I used to kind of to show the influence. You know, at the bottom, it's we the people. Our influence was at least equal to, if not greater than, the amount of money going in from the special interest groups. But as you go around to the left, you start seeing the big money influence start to take over, and our influence keeps getting diminished. And we've come to the point now where I would argue that big money special interests are the de facto fourth branch of government right now. They are the ones who are writing the 1,100-page bills that your congressmen aren't reading before they pass. Okay, the special interest groups are the ones who are really much calling the shots. And these 535 people are the ones who've let this happen. You got 100 senators and 435 representatives. And here's how diminished our influence has been on their actions. And as you recall, on October 3rd, 2008, they passed the TARP bailouts. Okay? In 2 weeks later, in mid-October, they do a monthly survey of congressional approval ratings, and in 2 weeks after TARP passed, it was the first time ever, single digits, 9% approval rating. First time it ever sunk to single digits. That's how mad the American public was at the Congress. The month prior to the bailouts, it was at 21%, so it dropped like 13% in that 1 month. Yet, on November 3rd, 1 month after the bailouts, we reelected 96% of them. And it's even worse than that, because if you voted for TARP, you were reelected at a 98% rate. We actually unelected more people who voted against TARP than voted for it, despite the public outrage that we had going on out there. How do you like those apples? Like I said, this first part, it gets a little depressing when you start really thinking about what's taken over. And we would say that this is the fundamental truth. This is the fundamental reason that this has occurred in our country. The reason big money has taken over is because Congress has radically altered our budget and tax policies, okay? We used to have a very simple equation when we set this up. We had Congress set up by the Constitution, which was to decide how government funds would be spent. We'd have taxpayer money go into the halls of Congress, and government services would come out. That was the equation. Those government services could be fire departments, police departments, border security, Marines, whatever those services were that the government was providing, tax money went in, services came out. It's a pretty simple equation, and I think most of us understand the importance of having to fund certain things. That's why we got rid of the Articles of Confederation and instead went to the Constitution. This is an equation I think most Americans, if not all Americans, could get behind. But along the way, what's happened is the original purpose of those tax and budget policies has been altered. Congress threw that original equation out the window, and they've added a new radical twist. And now, what our tax and budgeting policies have become is an ever-expanding method of rewarding special interest campaign donors. That's the twist. It's no longer just to provide services, it's a way of distributing benefits to the people who are funding their perpetual reelection campaigns. And if you think about this, I've been doing this for over a decade now as I've been looking at this. If you think about it, there's only 3 things Congress can offer somebody in exchange for a campaign contribution, okay? In terms of a value. I mean, they could offer us representation. That would be nice. But if you were going to be funding both sides of the aisle in order to get a benefit, there's only 3 things they can give you. One is they can give you a share of our tax dollars. Okay, and there are certain special interest groups that have made an art form out of getting the maximum amount of tax dollars out of our treasuries and into their pockets. That's one way they can give a benefit, and that's why we say the reason big money's taken over is that they've altered the way we budget and the way we tax. Getting money, public money, into private pockets is a distortion of the budgeting process. The second thing they can do is they can give you exemptions from taxes. That's another way we can distort the original equation. And here's something to consider. It's since 1913, when the income tax was put into place, we have added, on average every year, some years more, some years less, but on average, 765 new pages of tax legislation each and every year. Okay? Now that's the size of Harry Potter 4. I don't know if you've read Harry Potter 4, that takes a while to get through. And if you think, if they've been at this income tax thing since 1913, we've had 97 years to get this right, but somehow we have to keep amending it, 765 pages every year. You got to stop and ask yourself, what's in those 765 pages? Every single page, every single word is one benefit after another, giving special tax treatment to one group over another. That's what's in those 765 pages. The third thing they can do is they can give you an exemption from the rule of law. And all that basically means is they can give you special treatment under the law that somebody else can't get. Those are the 3 things that Congress can offer you in exchange for your campaign donations. And those are 3 very important things, because if those are the 3 things that they give out to fund the system that has taken away our capacity to truly choose our representatives, then those are the 3 things we're going to have to look at fixing. So when you see every earmark, every time you see an earmark, I can tell you right now that earmark is designed to pay back a special interest group, okay? And when you talk to incumbents about earmarks, they'll dance around the subject. They're going to tell you things like this: well, Constitution gives Congress the right to decide where to spend money. All an earmark does is it tells people where to spend money. That's constitutional. What's wrong with that? And we're making sure that the executive branch doesn't just decide where to spend that money. I'm doing that for you. But here's where the earmark becomes corrupting, and this is the definition of an earmark that you want to use when you talk to an incumbent. It's a specific number of dollars given to a specific recipient with no competitive bidding process, only because the senator or congressman said so. Now, when you look at it in those terms, you start to see what happens. This is why the National Council of La Raza and their corporate sponsors donated $189,000 to Barbara Boxer in 2008, and Barbara Boxer inserted a $5 million earmark for the National Council of La Raza. $181,000 going in, $5 million coming out. That's a pretty good return on investment. And in 2009, they gave another $160-some thousand to Barbara Boxer, and she gave them another $5 million earmark. Now, National Council of La Raza works full-time trying to make sure that illegal immigrants get amnesty. Now, you may not agree with that, but you need to know this, that when you are debating that issue, you are debating that issue after you go to work all day, and then you're trying to find time to be active on that issue in between your family and your church and your work responsibilities. National Council of La Raza has $5 million each of the last 2 years to they get paid to go out and do that all day long. That's their job. Okay? That playing field isn't quite so level when you look at that. The other thing is, when you hear about an 1,100-page bill that Congress won't read and signs into action, you got to stop in here and say, what could they possibly put into 1,100 pages? That's bigger than Harry Potter 4. Well, in essence, every item in those 1,100 pages is one of those three benefits. It's either federal money being steered to a private entity, or it's an exemption from taxation of some sort, or it's some exemption from the rule of law that somebody's getting specialized treatment in. In essence, when you see an 1,100-page bill, it's almost it's entirely one huge earmark using the definition I just gave you of earmarks. And Alexis de Tocqueville, when he was looking at democracy and writing about it in the 1800s, he had this great quote. And he said, "The American Republic will endure until Congress realizes it can bribe the American people with their own money." Okay? We have reached that day. They are buying votes, and they're getting to the point where it's shameless. We have Nancy Pelosi standing up and saying that unemployment benefits are a great stimulus plan, one of the greatest stimulus plans. They are literally buying votes. Okay? So that's going to bring us to fundamental truth number 2. If you accept fundamental truth number 1, that because of the altering of those tax and budgeting policies they've taken over, as a direct result of that, you and I, the general public, will never have enough money to compete with that. Ever. No matter how much we organize, no matter how mad people get, we will never be able to compete with the big money special interest groups, because, as I'll show you right now, as soon as they get into this system and do the very first round, after that, they start using our tax dollars to fund this system against us. And watch how this works here. Remember, this is the equation we're stuck in with right now. We have tax money going into Congress. Congress is handing out benefits. They're making this ever-expanding pool of benefits that is available. And whenever you've got an expanding pool of benefits, what we have is an ever-expanding pool of lobbyists whose only job is to go after those benefits. That's their job. Okay, that's what's on their resume. And right now, there's over 35,000 registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Now think about that. There's 535 senators and representatives. There's 35,000 lobbyists on record who are descending on them each and every day. And every one of those lobbyists has more incentive, they have more time, and they have more money than you and I do to try to influence Congress. Because if you accept the problem as I've just outlined it to you, there's only 3 ways that they can fund those benefits, and all 3 of those are tied back into your budgeting and tax policies, then you realize it's a systemic problem. If you realize it's a systemic problem, you now know that it's not a problem per se with Democrats, it's not a problem of Republicans, and it's not a problem that any third-party candidate is going to solve. Because the problem is systemic. We got to fix the system, okay? Now, I like this graphic here. That's what I call my We the People graphic. The reason I like it is it's just a generic little thing, and it kind of shows, it doesn't matter if you're looking at political persuasion, economic level, education level, all of us are at different places, right? We're all at different levels. We're all moving up and down on the pie chart, if you will. But the bottom line is we the people have to unite and come together no matter where we are in the spectrum of things. And what I'm showing you right now, by the way, when I show it to Democrats and liberals, they get the problem. They see the problem, okay? Not enough of them yet buy into the solution, but they see the problem. And we need to get together and fix this. So here's what we would propose to start looking at. If this is what we want, if we want this original equation, Taxpayer money goes in, government services come out. But this is what we're stuck with right now. What we need to do is fix this equation that I